folks, how you doing? Welcome back to the channel. I know I haven't done a video in a while here. It's been, oh geez, almost a year. And that's mostly because I didn't have much to say. Um, I have a strong ethic about not putting garbage up on my channels, although some people would call some of the videos on my other channels garbage, but that's, at least I try. So you're not going to see me just throwing up anything and everything, but I've been thinking, a topic kind of came up and I was thinking about it today, and I was actually kind of inspired by watching some other people's videos on the similar topics, but I was thinking, okay, what are the use cases for certain operating systems? I mean, what is it that makes one operating system, more suited to a task than another? And a lot of times people say, Windows this or that, but the thing is, even within Windows, like what you're looking at here is Windows 7. You say, okay, why you want a Windows 7? Windows 10 is the latest release. You should be using it. It's kept up to date. It's got all the latest this, that, and whiz bang. Yeah, that's all true. But the real question is, well, how do I use an operating system? To me, an operating system is a tool. Okay, I don't need it to sell me things. I don't need it to entertain me in ways I don't want to be entertained. I need it to perform a certain task. And for me, excuse me, in this particular case, Windows 7 works real well for what I do when I'm in what I call production. Now, I'm still an IT guy. I'm still an IT, but lately I've been more power user than IT guy. I have specific use cases for things I do and things I use that measure up well and match up well to Windows 7 more so than they do the Windows 10. In fact, this machine right here actually was running Windows 10. I was trying to run a production. I did that for a year, and I ended up rolling it back to Windows 7 because the problem was Windows 10, by its design and its nature, was getting in the way of my workflow. And that's a problem. I do more than just web browse and get email. If you're going to do, if that's all you really care about, that's all you really do, really you could do that on your smartphone. I mean, you don't need anything else. You don't really need to worry about an OS. And if you need something a little more than that, or maybe a little bigger screen, something bigger than a tablet or that, then you get yourself a Chromebook and ChromeOS, which that's really all you do on it is web stuff and email and maybe some web-based apps that don't look like web-based apps, but that's about it. I know schools now they've moved away from PCs. They kind of moved to iPads for now. A lot of schools have gone to Chromebooks now because they're cheaper, for one thing. They're a little easier to manage, and everything is cloud-based now anyway. Even Microsoft knows that. I mean, Microsoft still tries to push Windows 10 and push it down your throat, but the fact was there wouldn't be a Microsoft Azure if there wasn't a realization that the cloud is still the future. People have been saying that for a long time, but the meaning has only changed slightly. The fact is that the OS platform we run on is becoming less and less important than just having access to the resource, and the resource is more and more frequently on the internet, in the cloud, and that's where it is, and who cares what OS you're running. Now, there's special use cases. Like for me, Windows 7 works well because I use a combination of newer and older things, and there's certain things that just don't work well in Windows 10. There's certain workflows I have, like for example, when I'm editing videos, or maybe if I'm doing some virtualization stuff or that Windows 10 kind of gets in the way because of what it's doing in the background. The data collection stuff aside, Windows 10 is more intrusive into my production and my workflow, and that's a problem. It's especially a problem in the enterprise. I can lock down a Windows 7 machine a heck of a lot easier than I can lock down a Windows 10, and then there's still going to be background services and that running that I, as an IT administrator, am not going to have complete and total control over. The other thing is I've called Windows 10 updates a menace. The whole process is a menace because you have limited control. You can only stave off things. Even if the update's going to break something, if Microsoft wants you to have it, they're going to push it at you, even if you stave it off, for a couple of weeks or something like that. And I'm not a real fan of being forced to break my computer. Windows 7 doesn't do that. Windows 7, you can roll back any update you want. You don't have to take updates. Um, that's one good thing. The other thing is, uh, it's just not as intrusive. In general, when I'm working, I'm not getting, I'm not going into my start menu, all right, and getting advertisements for Microsoft Office, okay, or going into File Explorer and getting an ad for something else over here or something like that. I that kind of stuff is just, it's uncalled for. The fact that every time I do an update, if I change settings a certain way, I have to change them all again because the update changed everything back, to the point to where I've had to do used applications and little tools to basically on Windows 10 to roll back all the security checks and some of the apps. If I want to get rid of an app that I don't want, like I can't stand Microsoft's Mail app, I'm not that wild about the Edge browser, that kind of thing. I have to go into PowerShell and figure out PowerShell commands to get rid of something, because otherwise Microsoft won't let me get rid of it. It won't let me take it out of programs and features. It won't let me take it, just do an uninstall off a menu tab or something. It's like they have certain things in there, like Paint 3D or what's their old music app, or camera or photo and video, that stuff or it'll set automatic defaults to applications I don't want. This is not something that helps my workflow. And the nice thing about Windows 7, and I think the reason why a lot of people stay with Windows 7, is that you can make Windows 7 the way you want it and not be bothered by Microsoft. Windows 10, Microsoft is going to be bothering you every time they do an update or every time they do a new release. The other thing is, I've literally had machines with Windows 10 be broken by a Windows 10, for lack of a word, a kernel update, patch, whatever. I've got one machine that it went to 1809, for example, and the minute it did it, the machine went into an endless reboot loop. Well, the problem was because it was incompatible with my virtualization I/O settings, the BIOS setting of the computer, so it broke it. I had to turn that off so the machine would actually run. But I just lost my virtual I/O extensions, which for me is a real problem because, see, like, if you don't have the virtual I/O, oh, we got a new version. Okay, we have problems with things like, let's say VirtualBox. I like to test stuff out in a virtual setting, and if I don't have virtual I/O, or if I'm running, say, VMware Workstation, I shouldn't have to deal with that. Okay, so that's a problem in and of itself. But again, now I'm kind of getting into a rant in a complaint session here, and that's not the focus of this video. The use case is Windows 7. Look, I know in January of 2020 it loses all support. It's on extended now, but it's going to lose all support. And the question is, well, okay, I need to run 10. What's that going to do? Well, 10 is going to look very similar. In fact, you'll see that in a minute here, but it's not going to operate the same for a lot of things. It's going to interfere with your production. You say, okay, well, what's my alternative? Well, your alternative is you could stay with 7 if your workflows, mandate that. You could try to adapt to 10, and in some ways, I have Windows 10 and 7 on machines all around my house, and I use them for different reasons. Honestly, if I want to do serious work, I'm using Windows 7, just because I tend to get in a groove and I don't like being interrupted. Now, if I want to do something, say, like, if I'm a gamer, let's say, this is kind of a 50-50 for me. I prefer Windows 7 if I'm gaming because, again, it stays out of my way. But if I want support for things like, say, DirectX 12, you only get that in Windows 10. You're not getting that in Windows 7. There's no DirectX 12 support for Windows 7. That's kind of major for if you're somebody who plays a lot of newer games and things like that. That's a very big issue. So that could be a real good use case for Windows 10. Maybe likes a little more of a kiosk, kind of a less techy kind of presentation of Windows, then Windows 10 would be okay if you have to run a Windows version and say you have to run a desktop version of Office, from Office 365 or something like that. That's a good use case for Windows 10. And then there's Linux. You say, okay, well, why don't I go to Linux? Well, here's the thing about Linux. There are good versions of Linux, say like I said, Linux Mint, PC Linux. Some people like Ubuntu. I don't care for Ubuntu. Linux can look and feel and work very much like Windows, but there is a learning curve there. And when things go wrong, it's a little bit more difficult to troubleshoot. They've done a better job in later distros here and in the past years of trying to shield end users from a lot of the underpinnings of Linux, but there are issues there that just it makes it a bad desktop OS for, say, an enterprise, just because the support is not going to be a good experience for either the person supporting it or being supported. There's too many things that could be easily screwed up. It's open source. Open source is great for development. I don't like open source for production. I don't want to deal with somebody's, let's face it, guys, what is in essence a hobbyist project. And I know that's insulting to a lot of developers, but let's face it, it's open source. People contribute to it, people change it. Your control over it is very limited. You put it out there and people make it into what they need it to be. And that doesn't always work for every use case. With Windows, you get an app, it's going to work. It's kind of in a little sandbox of its own there. You're not going to have a lot of variation between Windows apps, so if things go wrong, there's usually a set procedural toolbox you can use. It's a lot easier to deal with than Linux. Linux, it could be problems with hardware, it could be problems with the library version, it could be problems with somebody just clicked something wrong.
All right. We're actually on another machine now. This is my Windows 10 machine. This is a machine I primarily use for gaming. I do some on my other YouTube channels. I have a game live stream that I do a couple of times a week. I just play games in general on this, capture stuff. Thing is, I may game on this machine, I may capture video on this machine, but I don't edit the video on this machine. I don't do anything with databases on this machine. I don't do anything with spreadsheets or Word documents or write-up. This is not what I call a production machine. This is something it's a recreational use case. It's kind of just the home PC. Do a little bit of everything, but nothing too serious. That's how I look at Windows 10. And that's how it's played out for me. If it's nothing I have to worry about or have to be concerned about, of something that costs me money, that kind of thing, then Windows 10 is fine. And it's pretty stable. And the use case is good for what I use it for, especially because of things like, for one thing, Windows 10 supports DirectX 12. Windows 7 doesn't. I don't think Windows 8 does either. So if you've got newer hardware and you're playing, newer games or something like that, you won't be able to use DirectX 12, which could be a real problem for some people. That's one thing. Better memory management, yeah, better isolation, stuff like that. It's good. More secure, yes, absolutely. The problem is there's interruptions to my workflow. I'll just show you some things I get irritated about. Okay, 3D viewer. I didn't install that. I don't want it. I can't uninstall it. I literally would have to go and run PowerShell commands to uninstall things I don't want. Okay. Connect. I don't care about Connect, and I can't uninstall it. Okay, I'm not wild about Cortana, but okay, that's something else entirely. Game bar, who cares? Groove Music, who cares? My Office. Okay, what's My Office? Look at this. This is an advertisement. I'm not interested in buying anything else. And this got loaded with the last update. Every time I get rid of this stuff, the next update loads it back in. I don't want it. Messaging, okay, garbage. Microsoft News is, it's okay. I definitely do it with the Microsoft Store. Movies and TV is a stripped down video viewer. I don't like it. I actually defaulted back to the old media player because that works better for me. I mean, some of this stuff may be useful to some people. It's not to me, and it's in the way. Okay, my phone. What do I care about my phone? And I can't get rid of it. I can't. It's not going to go anywhere. You know. Um, these are things that they're more annoyances than anything else. But then again, this is not a production PC. This is primarily a gaming PC. It doesn't get in my way of trying to do something more serious. Now, I want to do something serious. I do it on 7. But the use cases, I don't see Windows 10 as a professional operating system. I just don't. And then what I mean by a professional is I mean something that I'd be comfortable seeing in enterprise, even years later. Okay, has it been 2, 3 years it's been out, something like that, with all the basic iterations. The other thing is, I told you earlier, this thing got an update to the operating system and it broke my machine. I had to literally turn off hardware features. That's a problem. And that was a very serious interruption to even the relatively unimportant workflow that I do on this machine. So the use cases, I say Windows 10 is something you do where you need a desktop OS, but nothing too serious. Okay, that's kind of the use case I see for this here. And if that's your use case, great. And it'll probably work wonderfully. If you don't care, if you use the latest of everything, you don't have any legacy apps you're really worried about. You don't mind that an update will interrupt your workday, even though you set active hours, it just seems to ignore it anyway. If that's you, fine, great. It's not me, not for my particular work case. I just happen to be one of those people that has different usage scenarios for different computers, and Windows 10 has kind of forced me to that. And that's a failing, because if you a good Windows OS is a polymorph. It can be anything you need it at any time. Windows 10 goes a long way towards that, but falls a little short. When it breaks things, when things don't work as well, when OS processes get in the way of you doing your work, your workflows, that's an issue. I'll give you a good example here. Okay, look at this. I don't want this. I don't want a timeline. I don't need Facebook on my freaking search bar. But let me put it this way. Let's look at the settings here. Now let's do something like what you might normally do. Okay, I don't want to talk to Cortana. You see this? I hit settings. I was in Cortana, and it automatically thought I wanted settings for Cortana. No, I just want settings. Okay, see, there's an annoyance right there. When you have kind of dynamic functionality, some people will think that's great. It's an intrusion to me. If I want Windows settings and I click the gear, I want to see this. I don't want to see something that's tailored to the last thing I opened. I closed the last thing I opened. I don't want to see settings for it. Okay, fine, rant over. But let's say we want to look at our network, okay, our network settings. Okay, here's the basic information. But for me, okay, I'm looking at this stuff going, okay, there's a level of abstraction here. So let's change adapter option. Good, that brought this up. Well, if you know anything about Windows and you know some tricks and tricks of the trade, you don't have to go through all this level of abstraction. Okay. For one thing, if you want to see the old control panel, it's an app, there she blows. Okay, it's basically Control-exe. Now, some of these apps, will go to, like, let's see, what's one of these? Some of these will go to the old Windows, control panel applets and open them. Some of them will go to the Windows 10 equivalent. Like programs and features still looks like Windows 7. And even, this is funny, Internet options, this is like a holdover from Windows XP. There are some apps that will automatically go right to Windows 10 app equivalents. Let's see if Administrative Tools does. Okay, so far so good. Anyway, this is a good place to go. If you're used to the way Windows 7 works, but you have to know how to get there. You have to know the control panel's control panel. Now, you remember we went to this network settings and just get to adapter settings. We got all that rigmarole. Well, if you know something like ncpa.cpl, that's worked since Windows XP. You get right to your network settings. Do what you need to do without levels and layers of abstraction. Okay, is it kind of a pet peeve? Yeah, but the thing is, so much of Windows 10 puts so many more layers of abstraction in front of basic functionality, especially for somebody who knows Windows and has worked as a professional in the IT field. It's annoying. It gets in the way. So we've looked at Windows 7, looked at Windows 10, kind of talked about the use cases, why you would use one over the other, that kind of thing. Um, let's take a look at Linux.
All right. Now we're on to Linux, and here's what are the use cases for Linux? Well, this is Linux Mint. This is Cinnamon 19.1. This is the latest as of this recording. And the thing about Linux is a good Windows alternative for more of the power user set, for people that aren't afraid to get under the hood. Now you could use it day in and day out. Like for example, if you like to use Microsoft Office, you have LibreOffice. So there's LibreOffice Writer. You want to watch, or look at websites or go to YouTube. You got Firefox, and you get Chromium in here too if you want to download it and install it. The thing about Linux is it can be a very much Microsoft Windows-like experience, but it could also get a little hairy if things go wrong. It's not quite as user-friendly as Windows. Yes, you can make it user-friendly, but there's a lot of ways to get into trouble on this. Now, yeah, you can lock it down, but it's a lot more work and it's a lot more to manage. This is another OS it's not good for the user desktop experience in a professional environment. It's just not. It's not going to work as well for most users. Now, if you're more of a power user, you're somebody that's already messed around, yeah, maybe it could work. Of course, you're going to give headaches to your IT staff because they're going to have to support something they're not used to supporting. But here's my best use case for Linux. The best case for Linux is probably to give yourself a front end for a lot of services that you may run, web services or FTP or database service, that kind of thing. A lot of people use it for that. In fact, over 90% of the stuff on your internet you see served up, YouTube, all that stuff, it's not coming off Windows servers. It's coming off some flavor of Linux, and that's just the way it is. All those Amazon web services and all of them run some variant of Linux. Okay. That's what Linux is good for. It's a good backend because it can be very lightweight and very much easier to manage from the IT side of it. You can configure it and strip it down so much that it only does one thing. That's why you find Linux in a lot of Internet of Things devices, a lot of the IoT devices, a lot of stuff that is single purpose built to do something. Because you could lock it down and strip it down that much, and it'll work. I mean, you could still have Linux running on stuff that, I've got Linux running on a 12-year-old laptop. It's a version of Mint, and it runs fine. It doesn't handle YouTube too well with videos because it's only a single-core processor, but still. That's what it's good to. That's the other use case. Older hardware that you want to repurpose, that you want to do stuff. If you just want something to look at email and maybe browse the web, that kind of thing, and you've got old computers sitting around, it's not good for anything else, too slow for Office, too slow for anything else. Linux is great for that. It's great for giving second life to older hardware. If you want to experiment with more intense, more heavy lifting with, things like web servers, like Apache or whatever, that kind of thing, Linux is your guy. That's a good use case. The power user set. Me, I use it primarily, and I usually see it, by the way. The way I use it is usually like a lot of Linux quote-unquote power users do. They use it as this kind of the console, and they're doing stuff at the console, with their LS and PWD and PS minus AX, and okay, I did that wrong. But I'm looking at. I mean, this is when a lot of people think Linux, they think of this right here, all this gobbledygook and that kind of thing. Let's say, let's look at the service status here. Status all. Okay, stuff like that. I mean, you start learning stuff in Linux and doing stuff with the command line. The history command. You can see what our last what did we do? Okay, let's redo a command here. This 42. There we go. Okay, you see, this is kind of power user stuff. This is the usage stuff. This is people who like to get under the hood, people who do a lot of coding, that kind of thing. There's the open source, just about everything open source out there, open source applications is running on some variant of Linux and is developed on some Linux variant. Actually, uh, even macOS, which is something we don't talk about, and I don't have Macs anymore, but and I don't think there'll be a macOS in 10 years. I think it's all going to be iOS or some variant. There's a convergence there. But that use case, it's getting harder and harder to have a argument for Mac OS anywhere anymore, because for one thing, Mac OS, ever since OS 10 started, has been a BSD, which is a Unix variant, just like Linux is. It's not Linux, it's BSD, but it's still very much a Unix-based operating system. Linux is everywhere. Okay, Unix variants are everywhere, and this is the stuff that's primarily running the world. If you ever watch the show Mr. Robot, you see him doing a lot of stuff in Linux, and usually he uses some version of Ubuntu or Debian or something like that. But this is more of the power user stuff. When you want to, I often say I learned Linux and I started picking up Linux because I wasn't learning enough about how things worked. I'm the type of guy that wants to know how things work, how things are put together, how they function. And Windows is too many layers of abstraction, and Windows 10 is even worse. I went to Linux because I jumped in feet first and got up to my neck in it because I wanted to learn how things like IP worked and networking and stuff like that. I want to understand it, and let me tell you, you do it in Linux, you learn about how a lot of things work because there's a lot of things that still have to be manually done. Yes, you could use Linux and never touch the command line. You really can. You could. There's a lot of things you could do, but honestly, it's more hobbyist centered. It's more enthusiast centered. Development centered. This is something that came out of the world of development, of the world out of coders. It's only in the past, I'd say 5 years, have distros gotten really more user friendly and less reliant on doing things like at the command line and compiling things and stuff like that. But that's the use case for that. It's not for everybody. It's use case more of a power user. I wouldn't put this on your grandmother's computer unless you happen to live in the same house. It's just something that you have to kind of develop a need for it. You have to have an interest for it, and you have to want to spend some time with it. Okay, so here we are again back in Windows 7. So again, usage cases for all these different operating systems, even for the different variants of Windows, that's going to depend. Some people will say that I'm being a little too limited. I'm just telling you what my use case is, and I'm not that different. My workflows, my production, what I do, my uses for a computer, they vary. If I'm doing a lot of IT stuff, if I'm doing a lot of, back-end stuff, these days I'm usually in some kind of Linux environment. I really rarely do a lot in the Windows environment as far as Windows servers and that kind of thing anymore. It's usually some variant of Linux I'm working with, or at least to the point where if I'm working on a Windows server, it's probably got virtualization somewhere, Hyper-V or something like that going on, where I'm dealing with a VM that's just using Windows as a host, which that's an interesting use case, but most of the time people have VMware for that stuff, which by the way is another thing based on Linux. As they say, your mileage may vary. In the future, Windows 7 has got less than a year of support. Is that a problem? Well, not really, considering the last few security updates to Windows 7 only seem to slow it down and make it a little less reliable. In fact, I've taken a few off. if you've got something that's a good like Malwarebytes or something like that on there that's filtering your web traffic that you're keeping an eye on, that you're, Windows 7 will be fine for years after official support ends. And honestly, Microsoft's not really releasing anything. They haven't released feature updates in 2 years, at least 2 years for it. Not that I'd want any of their features. The last feature update they tried to release for it was to force Windows 10 down our throats. That's not a feature in my book. But Windows 10, eventually in a Windows OS, I would suggest getting familiar with it. Will it improve? Will it eventually be a little more enterprise, professional friendly? I think it will eventually get there. But honestly, I think 20 years from now, Windows is not going to be a thing. It's going to be all cloud-based. You're basically be working out of the equivalent of a browser, kind of like a Chromebook now. You're not really going to be hosting much on your own machine. And that's the key. The way people use machines is changed. Smartphones had a lot to do with it. The internet had a lot to do with that. The way people actually use their devices, to use computing resources, is different. We're not housing as much on the machines anymore. I'm kind of a throwback. I'm kind of old school. I still run a lot of stuff locally and do a lot of things locally. You see my little VirtualBox client here. In fact, that's how we were looking at Linux Mint. I just installed that and downloaded that when I was making this video, just so you could see what the Linux distro to use looked like, and what I would use it for. Windows 10, I call it a Kiosk OS, which means it's a gateway to other things. It's not a serious, I don't consider it a quote-unquote serious OS, even though it has great security, great memory management, DirectX 12 support, stuff like that. That's all well and good, but it's presented in such a way that it's more of an abstract, not something that I can take seriously in a professional environment, because so many things are abstracted from the user, especially if somebody like me who, deals in IT and deals in that kind of management of devices and operating systems. I know there's different versions of it. I know there's supposed to be a version coming out that's more like the old, what they used to call Enterprise N, which is real stripped down and that, and it's supposed to give more control over things like the desktop and, what data collection policies, that kind of thing. But so far I'm not seeing it, and so far I have yet to see more than the token Windows 10 machine in an enterprise. But that's going to change. That, or we're just eventually all going to go to cloud. There's going to be, the Google G Suite, and again, like I said, Chromebooks and stuff like that, where, if we've got the bandwidth and the back end has the power, computing power in the cloud, you're not going to have to worry about your OS platform. You're going to do everything through some version of a web browser or some kind of containerized app that just publishes something to you when you use it and takes it away when you're done with it. Anyway, I know this is kind of long-winded. I hope it was somewhat informative and interesting to you. I want to thank you for stopping by and listening to me, and I've got some stuff coming up in the future that I'm planning, but I've got to gather some information first before I release anything. Anyway, thanks for stopping by. You guys have a great week, great day, great week, great year. We'll be talking to you.